It is my honor to introduce our first speaker this morning. I've got to go off a card because I know a lot of things about him, but some of them I may not want to share in public, so keep myself honest here. Many of you know him as an early member of the DevOps community, certainly well regarded as an innovator, the father of the dojo model / movement, and a transformative visionary leader in the IT community. Me personally, I know our next speaker as based on my privilege to have worked for him for a couple of years. I can describe him as a collaborator who's always ready to help solve a problem, whether mine or someone else's. He's approachable and definitely someone you can partner with to help generate new ideas and new thoughts. A servant leader, someone who helped me get turned on to that very same pursuit and introduced me some really great sources on that. Many of you won't know this, but our next speaker is also a hockey player, and we've had many conversations about Gretzky's philosophy in terms of trying to skate to where the puck will be as opposed to where it is now or where it's going, where you're chasing it down all the time, looking ahead to try and find a way to get there. Our next speaker is a disruptor, right? Constantly ready with new ideas and the focus to bring those to fruition with a focus on principles, and somebody who is uncompromising in the pursuit of those principles. Many of you won't know that he's actually a pretty good singer, so if you ask him, maybe he'll belt one out for you later, and a father and a family man. He's here to tell us today, as a matter of fact, about a great story about his family, and I hope you all will join me in welcoming today's opening keynote speaker on day 2, Mr. Ross Clanton.
Thanks, Roger. All right, thank you. All right, let's get rolling here. Let me just unsleep my laptop. Okay. How is everyone doing this morning? How was day 1? Awesome? Cool. I'm super excited to be in Dallas. I'm going to just start this so that I'll talk about what this means in a second. I only have 30 minutes of content, so I'm actually going to spend like 5 minutes before I go into all the content. I love this community down here. It's really, I've been reflecting while I've been here the last day or so on the DevOps community here in Dallas, and it's really impressive. And even though I'm not a local, I realized how many people I know and how many experiences I've had down here, even in the last few years, and how vibrant this DevOps community is. I spent most of yesterday doing hallway track, talking to all these people I know. It was my Verizon crew from when I was there was out there. I was connecting with the folks at American Airlines. They did an internal DevOps event earlier this year I got an opportunity to speak at. A lot of people that I've met through, Gene Kim and other kind of collaborations in this industry. A lot of those people are local here, and that's super cool. I saw members of the Dojo Consortium. I don't know if you've had a chance to hear about the Dojo Consortium, but a lot of companies that have been contributing to advancing that movement. Saw companies that had come into Verizon as part of the measurement consortium. I think American Airlines, Walmart coming in from Bentonville. Yeah, super awesome to be able to hang out with this crew. So I'm in an interesting spot right now. I'm on a sabbatical for 4 months. I made a commitment, which I was so looking forward to coming here, so of course I was going to keep this commitment, but I made a commitment to come and speak here before I went on sabbatical. I left Verizon at the end of June and have put myself like a self-imposed 4-month sabbatical until the end of October, and I've actually been spending the summer with my family, which has been awesome. So I've been traveling with my kids, with my wife, gone all over different parts of the U.S., a lot of time at hockey rinks with my son. But this has been a nice break. It's been nice to kind of come back and get my hands dirty a little bit and get into things, which has definitely been what the last day or so has been all about. So Gene Kim has been asking me for a while, he's really into getting into these kind of dirty, nitty-gritty stories of failures. That's what he really wants to hear. And if any of you have been to the DevOps Enterprise Summit, he's always trying to like steer talks that way, and he's got his DevOps confessional format that he's been starting to present. And so I approached him and said, you know what, I think I could tell some really interesting failure stories here. And this talk is actually one I gave at the London DevOps Summit at the beginning of the summer. And it's really I'm gonna do some storytelling. It's gonna be a fun format. It's all animated. Mind's Eye, the folks that are actually doing the art and graphics for the talks today actually did my PowerPoints for me, so it's gonna kind of flow that way. As long as all the animations work, it's gonna be super awesome. If they don't, I'm gonna be up here telling stories with white screens, but either way, the stories are really interesting and they're real. So I've spent the last 6 years driving large-scale technology transformations at 2 Fortune 50 companies, 2 Fortune 40 companies actually, Target and Verizon. And in that time, I've dealt with some pretty complex kind of organizational challenges. I value this community significantly, and so I spend a lot of my time trying to give back to the community. And so I've been involved in a lot of podcasts, white papers, speaking engagements, anything I can really do to kind of advance some of the thinking in this space. There is a project-to-product paper that I'm super passionate about that should be published hopefully by the end of the summer that gets into like real life, how do you actually do a product transformation in large enterprises. Jason Zubrick, another local DevOps community guy, is actually a contributor to that paper as well. Super excited about that. Stay tuned on that. But, you know, through the journey I've been on, I've gained a lot of experience on what works and what doesn't in large transformations. And so I'm going to tell you some of the stories of what doesn't work. And I'm also going to tell some new narratives of the story so we can have a happy ending, but you're going to see some sadness through this too. So, driving DevOps transformation in large enterprises is extremely hard. To achieve true success, not only do you have to change your practices across the organization, you often need to navigate complex leadership dynamics and politics across the organization. You're typically changing the structure and the model for how work gets done, and you're trying to tackle the culture as well, and you're often working to change culture. And then you're also reskilling a lot of your workforce. So with all these barriers, why is it that we don't often hear more of these stories about failure? And I think the reality is it's hard to go out and tell these stories when you're representing a company. Most of your PR organizations aren't going to sign off on you doing a call for paper to go tell your failure stories. But I'm going to tell some. So this is going to get into real-life examples of challenges that I've directly faced, that my colleagues have faced in dealing with complex organizations. The stories are going to be based on firsthand experiences of myself and my colleagues, but I'm not attributing these to any single company, and I've actually mixed the companies, so these are stories from multiple different companies. But they are real examples, and the names of the individuals have been changed to protect the innocent. But again, these are real stories. But before we dive into the stories, let's talk about the type of failure that we're going to focus on. The reality is there's a lot of constraints in organizations that impact transformation success. But one theme that I really want to focus on, I think it deserves particular attention, is leadership. Constraints in leadership, failures in leadership. And those are things like sponsorship, having the right executive support, the leadership behaviors across the organization. This continually actually comes up as a top issue in the research that I've done in this space and in my direct experiences and in the direct experiences of some of my colleagues' stories that I'm going to talk about as well. So there's going to be a lot of examples of leadership constraints in here. Let's see if you guys can pick them out. But before we do that, let's dive into the 3 stories. And before we dive into those stories, I want to introduce 3 people. So it's time to meet Jackson, Isabella, and Jaden. They are 3 transformational change agents that you're going to get to know shortly through these stories. They also happen to be my children, so it's easy for me to kind of keep tabs of where I'm at in these stories. All right, I'm going to tell stories now. So Jackson is a transformational executive, recently promoted to the vice president of the digital portfolio in his company. He's a strong believer and champion of lean and DevOps ways of working. He's built a strong leadership team for his organization, made up of some of the best DevOps minds and leaders in the company. And this company was actually on the heels of a failed safe agile transformation, and his team really felt that there had to be a better way. So over the next 2 years, Jackson, his team, and his partners across the business and technology worked together to grow a better way of working. He started by orienting his own portfolio around DevOps ways of working, and he championed this across his peers across the company. He built a continuous improvement practice and used that practice to help others learn these practices in their portfolios as well. They initiated a talent development program in the company modeled after one of his key DevOps leaders so that they could try to emulate more of those skills and behaviors in others. And another of his leaders even helped middle management learn lean mindsets and ways of working. Beyond this, Jackson drove alignment with the executives on the one metric that mattered for that organization at that point in time, which was cycle time. Things were on a really good track. There was clear executive focus and measures, and the teams were seeing better results. They were now visualizing their value streams and systematically removing the biggest constraints, improving end-to-end delivery for each team, a team at a time. They started to operate as more full-stack end-to-end teams, similar to the two-pizza concept you heard yesterday, and similar to what you would see in a product model. So they're off to a really good start. Things were going well in this company. But one day things changed. This company always had a fairly operationally minded CIO. And they continued to face significant digital disruption in the industry. And so recognizing some of his gaps, the CIO hired a CTO to up their digital game. The CTO was a self-proclaimed DevOps expert, and she was ushered in to kick this company into a higher gear. Very quickly, they started undoing the changes of the previous 2 years. And they moved the company back to a more functionally siloed model, all in the name of increased efficiency. Within a few short months, 2 years of progress was nearly wiped out. Jackson and the change agents revolted and challenged this new direction. But they realized pretty quickly that they were in a difficult spot, and they weren't going to be able to challenge the direction. And eventually, they all decided to leave, and they moved on to other companies to be really awesome DevOps leaders. I think Adrian, I know he was here yesterday, I think he hired them all away and then got out of their way. So, a little bit of sadness there. Let's get to the next story. So this company was looking to modernize their technology, and they were looking to build an engineering culture and improve the time to value of their technology delivery. Isabella was leading this initiative, and she was reporting to the CTO. Her and a close band of leaders were working hard to drive change across this very large, complex company. The CIO at this company was very excited and set a vision for IT to be an investment center and a destination for top talent. This was a bold aspiration, and it served as inspiration for the transformation. While the messaging was set at the top, a few key issues became quickly apparent. First, the business was still largely viewing IT as a cost center. They had a long history of defining predefined requirements and expecting IT to just line up and deliver. Additionally, there were many business executives that had their own agendas, and in the name of customer service, IT would constantly reprioritize, managing by escalation and shifting their work around day to day. This company had also been attempting an agile transformation, but really didn't have much success over many years due to these same issues. Beyond this, the behaviors of middle management didn't change as well. These leaders still operated command and control with an execution at all costs mentality, and they continued to tell their teams what they could and couldn't do and put constant pressure to overcommit on delivery. I'm sure both of these stories have some familiarity to folks. As a result, these teams didn't have much space to learn, they weren't empowered to innovate, and they weren't empowered to improve. The quality and delivery of the organization weren't improving, and the business was actually getting increasingly frustrated with IT and their capabilities and thought that IT was a black box with no transparency. Recognizing this problem, Isabella had been experimenting with teams and suggested, after having small success, moving to a product model, effectively bringing the business and IT closer together. The CIO liked that idea and attempted to pitch it, but IT lacked the credibility with the business at that point in time. and there wasn't strong sponsorship to pursue. All right. Then what happened? So around this time, a new chief executive took the helm at this company. They immediately asserted that IT was too expensive, and this actually resulted in increased focus of IT being a cost center. And while the CIO didn't change their vision, they embarked on an outsourcing strategy for IT. So now you actually create an even bigger problem because leadership actions were not matching words. They're saying you're going to be an investment center and a destination for top talent, but you're outsourcing. Teams lost trust in management, and the organization remained relatively fixed in a legacy model with subpar performance. Two sad stories. One more sad story, and then we're going to get to the good stuff. Okay, Jaden had worked in this company for quite some time and witnessed a systemic dysfunction build in the technology organization over many years. Years before, this company had transformed following a COBIT model, organizing the technology organization around plan, build, and run teams. They built many centers of excellence and outsourced many of the engineering activities. Over time, the performance and cost of the organization got much worse. And this, coupled with increased disruption in the industry and new threats, created really a ripe environment to drive change. Jaden led the charge to start championing DevOps as a new and better way. The biggest constraint in the overall value stream at that company at that time was actually infrastructure delivery, and it took nearly 200 days to get environments for projects. That's a long time. Jaden led the charge to start championing DevOps as a new and better way. He pushed to make these problems transparent and drive improvements. While he was making good progress on automation, he also recognized that the operating model was a major hindrance and needed to change. So knowing this, Jaden designed a product and DevOps-inspired operating model that optimized infrastructure for agility and better integrated it with the development organizations. While Jaden was working hard to influence this, it faced a lot of resistance with the infrastructure executives. As you can imagine, that was a very different model than how they were used to working. After 2 months of no progress, he decided to try a different approach, and he started socializing the model with the development vice presidents to show them how it benefited them. This actually built more organizational support, and these leaders put outside-in pressure on the infrastructure executives to change. As a result, Jaden's role also broadened to have more impact across the overall technology transformation for that organization. So, very positive story to start. And actually, over the next 2 years, this company had a lot of success on transformation. They changed their operating model and their culture, and teams were delivering more value faster than ever before. But one day, the company started to hit a really rough patch, and there was a lot of instability and a lot of pressure being put on the vice president of operations. One day, someone caused a major outage due to a router misconfiguration, and it caused widespread impact across the organization. Upon investigation, it was determined that the change was made without a proper change request. And even though this wasn't a malicious activity, the VP decided to make an example of this person so that others would be more disciplined with their changes. As a result, this individual was exited from the company, and the event was publicized across the technology organization, even against Jaden's advice as to the impacts on the morale and culture of that company. As could be expected, there was a revolt within the engineering community. How can management claim that we're a culture that embraces failure and focuses on learning, but then they take actions like this? Ultimately, this did not have the intended consequences that the VP was striving for. Some of the top engineering talent resented management, and it played a role of some of them leaving over the following few months. I think, again, Adrian hired them and got out of their way. Okay, so let's talk about some of the leadership lessons learned from those stories. I want to lay these out briefly, and then I'll talk about a new narrative that ties these with a more positive ending. And I'd really look at 4 categories. So one is lacking strong C-level support for your transformation. Another is executive behaviors that contradict cultural aspirations. Not addressing the frozen middle. I'll talk about resistance in middle management and the frozen middle. And then technology transformation that's disconnected from business strategy. Really, I think all of the failures can, for the most part, be tied back to those 4 categories. All right, so lacking strong C-level sponsorship. As we saw in the stories with Isabella and Jackson, this type of change is too significant to drive across an organization without top-level support. You've got to secure C-level support in both the business and technology organizations, and you need to have these people championing the change for the organization when you're doing a full-scale transformation. This is going to enable you to counteract the resistance that comes from other parts of the organization and the folks that try to undermine the change. You can build momentum, grassroots, but you can only get as high as the grass ceiling, and that's not too high. So if you're really going to drive change at an organizational level, you got to bring tops down too. Choose new leaders that are aligned with this new way of thinking. Be deliberate about the leaders you're putting in roles and the leaders you're growing into roles. And if you think about this, if you place leaders in roles that don't understand these modern practices and modern ways of working, they tend to rely on what helped them be successful previously, and that isn't generally what's helping people be successful in the future. So really invest in helping leaders make those changes. And then executive behaviors contradicting cultural aspirations. I think, with Jaden's story, we saw this as a really difficult problem to solve. During transformation, executives are usually really good about communicating the new aspirations, like the vision of the future. Examples you would hear is, we're looking to empower more teams so that they can make more decisions. We want to embrace failure so that we can start to improve learning across the organization. That would be examples of aspirations you would often hear espoused. But what happens is if the leadership behaviors don't support these new ways, there's going to be problems. And examples that I've often seen is executives making technology decisions without engaging their engineers, or the witch hunts that result from failure, looking for the person to blame, which we did see in Jaden's story, or the overcommitting of delivery and the death march releases that follow where you burn your teams out. I mean, those are perfect examples of behaviors not matching words. And this derails change because employees they actually look at what executives do more than listen to what they say. And when what they do and say is out of sync, it creates huge problems. The best way to do this is you've got to develop the transformational leadership capabilities of the middle management and the leaders in your company. Invest in executive coaching. Invest in coaching these leaders to guide what those behaviors look like. Spend time defining what the new leadership behaviors should be for the organization. Okay, the frozen middle. My thinking on this group's evolved a lot over the last 6 years. So, I've been in middle management the last probably 10 years of my career. And when I was first starting to drive DevOps transformations, I was a little bit cynical of this group in general. And generally, when you talk to anyone doing these transformations in the industry, it's the same story. This is a challenging group to drive change with. And so I used to think people were just naturally resisting that change because they were change resistors. And then, what I've kind of learned and grown to appreciate over the years is it's a really hard role. You're managing a lot. Like, you're managing these top-down expectations to change. You're managing the team's expectations and what's the team trying to do to learn all these new ways. You're managing your business partners' expectations and your customers' expectations. Most middle management are burning the candle at both ends, working many, many hours a week, way more than 40, and then they're expected to help lead their teams through a major change journey, which is pretty high expectations to go through. So I think that's really why more of the middle management tends to be frozen in these changes. So what do you do about it? I think you got to pay special attention with this group. Help them understand the value of the transformations, the value to them and their roles, the value to their teams, how their roles evolve, how they can thrive and be successful in these new models. And when you start, focus on the ones, there are always people that want to change. You've got your early adopters that want to be the first ones to change. Focus on them. Build momentum with them, and really use that to pivot the later adopters later. However, even after all your best efforts, some are not going to get on board. I think the important thing is you got to drive enough momentum so that others realize that they need to make a decision. They realize that they need to either get on board or leave, and some will leave, and that's okay too. And finally, technology transformation that's disconnected from business strategy. So often with DevOps and a lot of these technology transformations, companies generally focus just on the technology organizations. And in doing so, you're actually not tackling the really complicated problem of aligning the business. And this becomes a big problem when you're scaling a transformation and you're trying to scale things like your operating model, and you're trying to tackle things like prioritization and funding model and roles across the organization. If you haven't figured out how to engage the business into your transformation, you're going to have problems at that point, and you're not going to be successful. And you can't get them engaged if you can't articulate your technology transformation in the context of how it supports the business strategy. So spend the time early on to understand the business strategy and to understand how your transformation is going to actually accelerate business agility and help them meet their business strategy. Get the business leaders on board with the change. If IT is just off chasing this stuff, which a lot of companies are because it's the cool thing to do and they see everyone else doing it, you're going to fail. All right, so let's talk about a new narrative now. So let's kind of tie up these stories in a different way and talk about what happens with Jackson, Isabella, and Jaden. So Jackson, Isabella, and Jaden were all connected through the DevOps enterprise community. And when they recognized the challenges they would face in growing momentum, they all worked together to collaborate on a strategy. Seeing how Jaden was already having a lot of success given the executive sponsorship, Isabella and Jackson made it a priority to make the case for change in their own organizations. They both identified the disruptive factors and the new threats emerging from newer, more nimble digital competitors. They did a deeper assessment on the constraints in their internal environments, doing things like the DORA, the DevOps Research Assessment that Jez Humble and Nicole Forsgren have been leading, and just doing voice of the customer to learn from their customers and their business partners what needs to change from a technology perspective. And they also armed themselves with product transformation guidance from the industry as well. That paper that's going to come out later will help, by the way. What they could see is the key was to expand from purely a DevOps-focused transformation to also a product transformation, which would really pull the business and IT alignment into scope. Each of them framed a case for change, and they anchored the outcomes on the data from the State of DevOps report to help their executives see how the business and technology performance could be improved. Having secured sponsorship in the C-suite, they took an opportunity to align the executives on what was needed from them to effectively model the way for this transformation in the organization. And so here's some of the actions they took. They defined a new set of leadership behaviors and incentives, and they emphasized things like empowerment, responsibility, learning orientation, and collaboration. They rolled out training on these new leadership behaviors, specifically through immersive workshops for leaders to help them learn the behaviors in the context of how their teams would be working. They invested in executive coaching to guide leadership behaviors and actions, ensuring these executives were enabling and empowering their DevOps and product transformations. And they identified role model leaders and invested in transforming their teams first, and then they held them up as beacons of success, showering them and their teams with recognition. And then finally, they brought in leaders from other companies and had them speak to their middle management and their executives about their own transformations they were driving in their organizations. Okay. So after solving these problems, Jackson, Jaden, and Isabella were well on their way to transformation success. So what happened to each of them? After aligning the CIO and the business executives on the transformation, Jackson was promoted to that open CTO role. This positioned him to quickly build off the success he'd started and expand the transformation focus more broadly across the organization. Jaden was able to push the company further into an optimized state. The business was no longer putting pressure on this VP of operations for stability. And actually, those challenges were now being funneled directly to the product and engineering leaders that owned each of the products. And they all put emphasis on prioritizing quality and improving tech debt as part of the products they were delivering. And by the way, the majority of the changes were now completely automated for this company, and the leaders were well coached on treating failures as learning opportunities. And they never missed an opportunity to continuously improve themselves when failures did occur in their products. And then Isabella built a strong coalition with other business executives in her company by helping them reimagine the business and IT operating model. She partnered with the business to make a case for how their project-to-product transformation would improve the business strategy from both a speed and cost perspective. And after receiving support from the C-suite, they started small with a single line of business and used that to build momentum across the rest of the company. Okay, so I have some advice to you. One thing I love about this community is everyone's trying to help each other, and most people that come to these events are change agents that are trying to drive change in their companies. And so what are some of the things that you can do to lead transformation in your companies? Embrace change. You know, when you pursue a path like this, change is inevitable and it's constant. Be resilient and adaptable, and you will need to help others go through these changes as well. So you've got to really focus on yourself first. Connect with this community and help each other. I actually owe a lot of my career success to the help I've gotten from others in this community. And you'd be surprised if you share your expertise with this community, how many people will come back offering to help you. Find champions in your companies, both in the business and IT. You're going to need to lean on these people, so make sure you build that bench of strength behind you. Establish a clear North Star. Inspire your teams and partners with a vision of the future. Use your outside voice. Be vocal within your community and externally. You have to be bold and be willing to change and challenge the prevailing views in your company. Empower your teams. It's funny, with all this talk about transformation and frameworks and agile transformations, at the end of the day, the only way to truly transform as a company is to empower teams and get out of their way. I still love Adrian's quote about, and I've referenced it a couple times about, we just stole your best talent from your company and we got out of their way. At the end of the day, that's what it's all about. When you can do that, you're on the right path. And then walk the talk. Demonstrate the type of transformational leadership that's required for your teams to thrive in a modern operating model. So you got to model the way for the organization. So this is a call to action to everyone here. If you look around, there's no one else in your organizations that are going to drive these changes. You have to be the ones to do it. Be bold. Find energy and inspiration from other like-minded people that you're around. One of the most liberating moments, actually, from my career was when I realized that my beliefs were more important to me than my job. And I had that realization about 6 years ago when I started focusing on transformations. And when you can do that, you can empower yourself to really do some amazing things. So I encourage you all to think that way. And finally, doing this originally at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, Gene Kim always asks people for what they need help with. That's like the standard closing slide for those talks. And I took a little bit of a different approach this year. What I would like is everyone that hears this talk to find at least one business leader and one technology leader in your organizations that you can put your energy into converting them to be champions around DevOps and modern ways of working. Because I think the only way this is really going to hit true success across the industry is when we actually get to a tipping point where more leaders believe that this is the way that we should be working than those that don't. And until we get to that point, you're fighting an uphill battle. You're pushing a boulder up a hill. So if everyone can go and find a couple people and convert them, we can really start to move the needle on that. And finally, shout out to Mind's Eye. I know they're doing the creative work, all the artwork you see on the walls from all these talks. They actually did the creative work on my slides as well. So if anyone's interested in this style of presenting, I know this is a little bit, this is something I've wanted to do for a while just because I love experimenting and trying new things. It's pretty fun, but you've really got to get your stories tightened up too because your slides are moving with or without you. So thanks to Mind's Eye Creative, and thank you all for listening. I do have some time for questions if folks want it as well. Thanks.
That better? Firstly, thank you for sharing. Really appreciate the insights. I'd be really interested to hear what observations or learnings, suggestions, anything you'd offer for people doing this in an outsourced model. I think that attracting talent and getting out of people's way is often complicated when you've got sort of discussions with HR and the like, talking about co-employment risk and all sorts of other more boring and mundane things. Any words of wisdom?
I mean, I don't believe that if you're truly going after a DevOps transformation, I struggle to see how to do that in a heavily outsourced model. I think if you outsource an entire capability, that's one thing, and then that outsourcer owns that capability end to end. Most companies do functional outsourcing. We're going to outsource operations or QA or development. I don't think that goes well with doing these types of transformations. And Target's been public about undoing that, and that was a big part of the transformation that I got to drive there was, we had outsourced a lot of our engineering capability long before. It was definitely the in vogue thing to do like 10, 15 years ago. Everyone was doing it because engineering was a commodity in everyone's mindset. And in a waterfall model, it's just a commodity piece that you plug in to get stuff done. And then when you realize that you have to optimize for agility and not cost, and the people that have made that leap, that when you optimize for speed and agility, you get better cost as well. That model doesn't work well for that. And you cut off your innovation capability often when you move to that model as well. And so I guess my advice would be, we undid it when we were there. We insourced about 1,000 engineers over the course of about 18 months, both in India and US. And we reduced our reliance on third parties. And we were able to build highly empowered teams that were FTEs for the most part that fully owned the products they were delivering, and it worked really well. So I guess that would be my advice, is try to undo it, which I know isn't easy. Any other questions? There's one up front here. Can you raise your hand again? There you go.
I've heard several times where people have mentioned how siloing can really negatively impact your organization. To me, there's a lot of gray area between siloed and ownership of something. Ownership seems to be a relatively good thing from that standpoint, but how do you define the difference between the two, and how do you get the advantages of ownership versus not siloing them off from the rest of the organization?
Sure, I'll take a stab at this and let me know if I got your question right. I would think about owning outcomes. I think with siloing, you own activities. Like you own a process. Like my process is QA, or my process is delivery, or my process is I write the Java code, or you own an activity, but you don't actually own like a business outcome or an end outcome for your organization. And with a lot of these operating model changes, you're trying to optimize for outcomes. And so the thinking, back when everyone was going down the waterfall path for 20 years was you're driving more efficiency with each function. You could locally optimize each function. And if everyone's doing their process really good, they magically stream together, and you've got like the super efficient way of delivering IT. And the reality is, all the complexity is like in the gaps and handoffs between all these teams. And when you look at it end to end, you always see a huge problem. Like when you do a value stream map, you always see a huge problem, and it's usually not even any one team's fault. It's usually something that's kind of in the seams between the teams that are causing these problems. So I would say, and I don't know if this is exactly what you're asking. If not, let me know, and I'll answer again. But I would really think about optimizing how you organize teams so that they're focused on outcomes. Like, what is the measurable result you're trying to drive for your customer, for your business? And then give teams full accountability to own all the things they need to do to plan, build, and deliver, and even run that thing. Is that what you were asking? Cool.
In terms of the project to product transformation, in terms of the executive audience, the folks who really need to buy in, what's the headline that you use to help them get the main reason why it's so important? Number one. Number two, what in an organization needs to change in terms of like roles, what
Yeah.
needs to go away, what's at risk when that transformation occurs.
So, I mean, first, often I'm asking a lot of whys of the executives and the leaders, because a lot of people want to transform. Like, every enterprise is doing some version of a agile, DevOps, digital, product, cloud transformation right now. Like, I'll bet you there's not a single company in this room that would say you're not doing one or all of those things. And often, I don't know that people even understand why they're doing it. They're just doing it because everyone else is doing it. So, like, this gets back to what I was saying about understand the business strategy and what you're driving for, and really get your executives to articulate what needs to change from a business strategy perspective so that you can align the IT strategy changes to support that. Usually, it's boiling down to time to value or speed in some way. Like, we've got to be more nimble at introducing changes in our environment in a safe way than we were able to be in the past. And cost, it usually boils down to as well. There's an element of cost all the time in these things, but when it's the driving factor, I think you really get to some bad decisions on how you approach the organization. But yeah, I think you want to kind of narrow into what's that real driving factor that you're going to enable with the technology side of the transformation. Product is interesting. I think why product's so powerful, and I do think it's kind of the bigger trend coming up in the industry right now, is, I feel like agile transformations went one of two paths. It was either like business portfolio management led, and then it was watered down waterfall, or it was like the water scrumfall thing you hear about, where it's like just the development teams are like rapidly developing code, but then the whole like process of planning and delivering and releasing doesn't change, and so you actually didn't improve a lot. So I think that's what happened with a lot of agile transformations. DevOps came around and kind of tackled kind of the last mile and brought that kind of water scrumfall to a little bit more end-to-end agile, but no one tackled like the upstream, how do we work differently with the business and technology and plan differently and prioritize differently and change our models so that we're working as more integrated functions. Product's starting to tackle that, and in different flavors of product that companies are pursuing. And that's where I think it's powerful is you now are bringing business and technology more together, but it's really hard because now you're dealing with more stakeholders, more executives, more opinions. So these transformations aren't easy. The paper, by the way, that will be published this summer, and this might help guide a lot of what you're just asking for. It'll be through IT Revolution. It should be out any day now, I think. It'll be out before the DevOps Enterprise Summit, but we interviewed 14 enterprises that have done some version of a product transformation. And then we obviously layered in some of our own experiences, because I've been through some of these as well. And really kind of got pretty how-to, like how do you actually drive this change across an enterprise, and like what was working and what isn't. And honestly, the four leadership constraints that I called out are directly taken out of that paper from our research we had done there. So definitely recommend that when it comes out. Did I answer you had a second part to that question. Did I answer the second part?
You have time?
I think I have till 9:45, right? Or you guys tell me. Okay, I've got time.
The second part of the question is, in order to operate as a product organization, imagine certain roles either just completely disappear, ways of thinking completely change. What are those things? What are the past behaviors that people have to confront and potentially abandon?
Yeah. I think so the roles, you need to empower product teams to own deciding what they're doing, how they're doing it. Obviously, they need to achieve whatever the business outcomes that are being set for those teams or the customer outcomes. But that's a big shift. In most companies, you've got competing business stakeholders that have their own agenda, and if you're in a project model, that all materializes as these investments, these project investments, that then everyone gets approved, and most companies have really horrible governance around that, and everything gets approved. And then IT either puts their own front door processes in place to block all of it then, but at the end of the day, what happens is you get a ton of competing priorities, and you can't make sense of, like, which executive is pushing harder and whose priorities do you have to satisfy and whose don't you. I think with product, you really simplify things for the teams because you know, like at Target, we got rid of the project model almost completely, and it just turned into kind of strategies that fed backlogs. And by the time you get to a team level, you just have a backlog that your product owners are working within their product owner community, following whatever framework or model that you're following, and they're working out from an outside view, like what the relative prioritization of things need to be, and then you're working out kind of at a lower level prioritization within your teams, and it actually makes things a lot easier there. Generally, I think the product owner should sit in the business. I think people are doing different models around that. Some are doing it in IT, some have hybrid roles, some are doing it in business. But really, the team should be a product owner and whatever the full set of skills are that you need to build and deliver that product. Usually, you would have a Scrum. Some companies go Scrum Master, some don't. That responsibility has to happen on the team somehow. So usually, I would say there's Scrum Master there, and you've got different types of technologists and engineers. And I know he had one up front here, too. He's had his hand up a bit, so after that, let's go.
So with transformation comes a lot of friction and a lot of rubbing against each other's shoulders. What's sort of the suggestion that you would give back to the engineers as they're going through all this transformation and getting pressure from both sides to make sure that they're not burning out or they're not getting misdirection and hearing one thing and then seeing another thing?
So I'll answer this two ways. The same answer for both, but different context. I don't know if any of you know who Jesse Robbins is. He was one of the founders of Chef and used to be, I think, the master of disaster at Amazon. He got to shut down data centers. He gave a talk 6-7 years ago that I loved, and his punchline was, "Don't fight stupid, make more awesome." And his punchline, one context is if you're in a company and they aren't going to change, then there's plenty of companies that want to change, so go focus your energy there. It's easy for folks in this community to find really good work. I would never worry about that. I often use his phrase inside of a company, because even inside of very large, complex organizations with thousands of people, there are people that want to change and there are people that don't. Put your energy into the ones that want to change. It's going to be a way more fulfilling experience. You're going to get better results, and you can build momentum that way. And so, and the other thing I would say, I've always focused on culture a lot in the work that I do. And so I would run internal conferences and events and things inside the company, because just like we're doing here in the community, because we got to keep people engaged and excited about this stuff, because it is hard. You are going to face resistance in a lot of the things you're dealing with, and you want to get re-energized. I get re-energized from these types of conferences. I get re-energized at the DevOps Enterprise Summit, and that enables me to go back in companies and push a boulder a little bit more up a hill, But every few months, I need to get re-energized. You had a question up front, so he's been patient with his.
Thanks. So you gave a very good presentation, and I think you've answered at a high level through your presentation and your commentary here. But you've got unique experience in having done DevOps successfully at, two large organizations. And I'm thinking about, my scenario. And do you have any feedback on, if a tornado comes through and blows your house down, and you've got, tiles and doorknobs, you can't build a house from that, right? You need all of the parts to build a house, and you need to do all of the things so that your house is built. You've got to put shingles up, and until that's done, you don't really have a house. Mm-hmm. So with the DevOps transformations at large companies, what I'm at least seeing is you sprinkle a little DevOps over here, and it does a little, but it doesn't go all the way, and you sprinkle a little DevOps over here, and it's impressive, it gets a little notoriety, but it doesn't really go all the way. Is it possible to start DevOps small? Because, and how have you seen that work or not work?
I'm a huge fan of bottoms up to start, like grassroots. You know, I talked about the grass ceiling earlier, which I stole that term from Jonathan Smart he was at Barclays, now he's at Deloitte. I love that term. I think you can build energy bottoms up, and bottoms up does start small. You're starting in pockets with people and teams that want to change, and those, sometimes it's a team at a time, it's individuals at a time. That serves, the main purpose that serves, in my opinion, is building energy and momentum, like getting people excited. At some point, you've got to take a really strategic approach to this stuff, and you've got to tackle your transformation holistically. Because what happens is that energy and excitement at a certain point will turn into frustration when everyone's in the boat ready to change. Now you've built a bunch of excitement on the ground, but now they feel like they're facing all this resistance. And so, you know, you gotta, I really believe in this kind of hybrid approach to transformation where you gotta get energy going bottoms up, and then you gotta water the seeds tops down so that the stuff can grow. And I think the trick, the challenge is how to do that. It's not easy. You know, I believe, to me, I simplify my framework on how I think about these types of changes, whatever you want to call it. If you want to call it DevOps, Agile, product, digital, whatever. There's four pillars that make up these transformations. It's your operating model, you know, your ways of working, your process, your structure, your team structures. It's your culture. It's your practices. It's the engineering practices and the agile practices and the product practices that you're following. And it's your technology. It's your architecture. It's the platforms you're introducing. It's are you starting to use cloud services for things? Like, those are all things that need to be tackled holistically. And often in companies, they're actually tackled separately. You got someone driving cloud strategy. You got someone driving agile strategy. You got someone driving DevOps. No one's talking to the business. And it's a mess. So I think at some point you got to figure out strategically how to pull those things together, but it's really good when you can build it on a foundation of some bottoms-up movement for change. Other questions? What are we doing on time? I don't know, maybe one more if folks have more? All right.
Good morning. So, quick question. I found that interesting a minute ago when you said, you know, you believe that perhaps product managers really belong over in the business organization versus the IT organization. So what benefits come from that sort of arrangement when the product manager really is in the business? You know what I'm saying?
I think at the end of the day, you know, it's funny, with DevOps, we get into all the siloing that happens in technology. We've got as big, if not a bigger problem in the siloing between technology and business, and even within the different business groups. And at the end of the day, we got to break that barrier down. Like, the reality is the product owner should be part of the same, at a team level, they're part of the same team as the engineers. Usually they are a representative, you know, your business stakeholders are generally driving strategy and priority. And so if you separate that and you put that owner in IT and now they're just liaisoning between all these business folks, I don't know how much you've really solved that problem. I've seen people make it work, though, so I'm not saying like it's not a model to do. I think every organization has different constraints and challenges and culture and power dynamics and all that stuff going on. So I'd say, well, do what works for you. You know, I will say one thing I really liked, the CIO that came into Target when we were like halfway through our transformation, he had an interesting approach to this, because at that point in time, the business, you know, basically technology was going down this path, and the business, he didn't really necessarily think at that point the business was ready to jump in this boat with us. And so we actually invested in transforming the skill sets of people that were in IT, that knew those business areas really, really well. They were the business analysts and consultants that worked with those portfolios anyway. We built them up into product owners, and then we gave them to the business and said, all right, but we need you to work with us differently now. It worked really well. But again, every organization has its own situation to deal with.
Thank you.
All right, I'm probably at time, right, guys? All right, thank you.